Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. To observe the 5 precepts, repeat after me. I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from killing beings.
abstaining from killing beings.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from stealing.
abstaining from stealing.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from sexual misconduct.
abstaining from sexual misconduct.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from telling lies.
abstaining from telling lies.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from taking
abstaining from taking
intoxicating drinks and drugs
intoxicating drinks and drugs
with the refuge of the noble triple gem.
the refuge of the noble triple gem.
I observe these precepts
I observe these precepts
for happiness in this life,
for happiness in this life,
for rebirth in heaven,
for rebirth in heaven,
to escape from the sufferings of samsara.
to escape from the sufferings of samsara.
May it help me and be a blessing.
May it help me and be a blessing.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So today, everyone, so we've covered all of Kaya-nupassana, Vedana-nupassana, Chitta-nupassana in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this week, last week, we covered the first section in Dhamma-nupassana, which was Pañca Nivarana. And this week, we're going to be talking about one of the most important and also one of the, I would say, one difficult subject, that is hard to grasp the concepts of, which is Upādānakkhanda, which means the 5 aggregates of clinging. Now, the Supreme Buddha teaches in, for example, the very first sutta the Buddha taught, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha teaches the 4 Noble Truths. And he teaches it as the very, very first part is suffering or dukkha. And he teaches being born is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, losing loved ones, loved things is suffering. Having to associate with things and people you don't like is also suffering. And then at the very end there, he says, if you combine everything and were to say it in one phrase, if you could say all of dukkha in one sentence, he says, Pañca, or the 5 aggregates of clinging, is suffering. And in many, many suttas, we find the Buddha teaches, if someone one day realizes suffering, then he sees the five aggregates of clinging. If one day someone sees the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, he sees the five aggregates of clinging. If one day someone realizes or understands this Dhamma, then he realizes and understands the five aggregates of clinging. So the concepts associated with the five aggregates of clinging, us developing our mind to understand the five aggregates of clinging, is an essential part of the Buddha's teachings. So just like someone has to realize dependent origination, someone has to realize the five aggregates of clinging. It is one of the most important parts in the Buddha's teachings. And when we learn the five aggregates of clinging, you'll see how amazing, how incredible the Supreme Buddha was, how incredible his knowledge was, because what he learned, what he realized under the Bodhi tree is something incomparable to us, something that's beyond our understanding. It's truly amazing. And you'll see, because since we only have a few lessons left in Satipaṭṭhāna, I thought I would try to cover these at most in one lesson, but Pañca is something we could talk about for 6 months and we still wouldn't finish. That's how much there is to learn. But I will do my best to teach you the most important and the most basic principles in Pañca in today's lesson. And then we will discuss on how we meditate on this topic as well. And based on how much time we have left, we'll try to do the entire meditation or a portion of that meditation. So it's important to understand first what Pañca is. So I'm going to share screens. So can everyone see my screen? So when we say Pañca, we have 3 separate words here. We have Pañca, which means 5. We have Upādāna, and then we have the word Khanda. So when we say Pañca, we're talking about 5 of something. So the 5 here is Rupa, or form, and especially in this Pañca, we're talking in reference to our body. So form, then we have Vedana, which is feeling, Sañña, which is perception, Sankhara, which is intention, and Viññāna, which is consciousness. So these are the 5 things that we're talking about when we say Pañca. Then for example, let's just ignore this Upādāna word for a second and jump to Khanda. So we say Pañca. So Khanda means, really this word means, it's split into 2 meanings here, or 2 things is involved in this meaning, which is time and space. So when we say time, we're talking about either the past, the present, or the future. Then when we talk about space, we're talking about something internal, external, something inferior, something superior, something gross or coarse, something fine, something far, or something near. So what we're talking about is a form that is either in the present, that is in the past, present, or future, that is either internal, external, interior, inferior, superior, gross, fine, far, or near. So we're talking about a form that exists in time and space. And the words here are kala and avakasha. But this is the best translation you can get from in English. So time here is talking about a form that has existed in the past, that exists in the present, or that will exist in the future. And that form is either internal, that means within us, or external. It's either inferior or superior. That means it could be a low class form, or a high class form. It could either be gross or fine. It could be near, it could be far or near. So whatever form that exists between time and space is called Pañca. So whatever Vedana, whatever feeling, whatever perception, whatever intention, and whatever consciousness we're talking about that exists in time and space is called Pañca. Now what happens is, this Pañca-skandha, what happens to it? We cling to it. That's what it means by Upādāna. We cling, it says sāsava upādāniyam, which means we cling based on defilements. So based on the defilements within us, we cling to a form that exists in time and space. We cling to a feeling that exists in time and space. We cling to a perception that exists in time and space. We cling to an intention that exists in time and space. We cling to a consciousness that exists in time and space. So just the form and khandha is called rupa-skandha. Just the feeling and khandha is called vedana-skandha. But what happens to us? We cling to those things. So it becomes rupa upādāna-skandha, vedana upādāna-skandha, sanya upādāna-skandha. So to all five of these, we cling. We cling in four types of ways. We cling based on sensual pleasures. We cling based on the formation of kamma to bear fruit. We cling based on views, and we cling based on ignorance. These are the four ways. We say the four āśrava. So kama āśrava, bhava āśrava, ditthi āśrava, and avidya āśrava. Āśrava, the word āśrava means defilements. So based on kama, there's defilements. Based on bhava, there's defilements. Based on ditthi, there's defilements. And based on avidya, there's defilements. So we're going to go through these one by one. So we'll start with pancha. Is anyone right now confused on these, just the general idea here? Is there anything that's difficult to understand? Okay, I'm going to assume no for now. So then let's talk about this five first. So we've already covered most of these in our dependent origination sessions. So when we say rupa, we're talking about a form. So form meaning anything that is made up of the four elements and the four elements themselves. So we have the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element. And we said this is not like in science where you say we're made of carbon and silicon and nitrogen. Here we're talking about we're made up of things that will one day break down and go back to becoming dirt. So this human body, once we die, there's portions of this body that will become part of this earth. It will become soil. There's parts of this body that will become will join the water element that exists in the world. Will join the water. So blood will join the water, snot and saliva, those things will join the water. Then there's the fire element. There's also heat in this body. When we die, this heat leaves this body. That will join the external fire element. And then there's also a wind. There's gas in this body that will join the external wind element. So form is, the definition of form is anything made up of these four great elements and the four great elements themselves. Now, is any of these impermanent or are these all permanent or impermanent? All of these things, even these elements themselves, are all impermanent. They're subject to change. Just look at your own body. Even though we're made up of these four great elements, one day this body will degrade and decay and rot and go back to being these four elements. And these four great elements that we find externally will also one day cease to be. So everything is subject to change. Everything becomes impermanent. So this form, this rupa that we say, is also impermanent. It changes. Our hair changes. Our skin changes. All these things change. So that's the rupa portion. Then we talk about, and these three things go together. There's feeling, perception, and intention. And these things are born through contact. So here we're talking about one example, which is eye contact. So for eye contact to occur, we said we need the eye to exist. If we don't have eyes, if we're blind, then eye contact can never occur. We can't ever see something. So the eye has to be there. And then there has to be something we have to see. So it could be our parents, it could be our children, it could be a show, whatever it is, there has to be a form there. There has to be something that we can see. But those two things aren't enough. Just because there's a form and just because the eye is there doesn't mean that we see something, doesn't mean that we cognize that thing. That's the reason is the consciousness, what we call vijñāni, that consciousness has to arise in the eye. So if we talked about an example, for example, if we're staring out the window, but thinking about something else, sometimes cars pass by, sometimes people pass by that window, but we don't have an idea of how many cars passed by, what kind of people passed by, what the color was, what the shape was, because our consciousness did not arise at that moment. Our consciousness was with the mind. So just because the eye is there and just because forms are there doesn't mean eye consciousness will arise. All three have to come together. When all three come together, when the eye, when forms and consciousness arises in the eye, when those three things come together, we call that eye contact. And then through eye contact, a feeling occurs. Either a pleasant feeling, either an unpleasant feeling, or either a neutral feeling. And based on eye contact, a perception occurs. We perceive something. Based on eye contact, there's an intention. So for example, let's say we're sitting at a restaurant and then someone is bringing a dish of food. So what happens? We have the eye there, we have the dish of food there, and eye consciousness has arisen, or consciousness has arisen in the eye. Then what immediately occurs? Eye contact occurs. Based on eye contact, a feeling arises. It might be a happy feeling, hey, my food's coming. It might be a sad feeling, hey, that's not my food, it's someone else's. We're hungry, but it's not our food. Or maybe it's a neutral feeling. Maybe it doesn't even matter to us. Based on that, we perceive something. What do we perceive? We perceive a shape. We perceive a color. That's a perception we have. That perception occurs through eye contact. And then based on that, an intention arises. Maybe we call the waiter, hey, come here, that's mine. Or maybe we say something, is my food ready yet? That is through intention. And here intention means we're creating kamma. So every time this contact occurs, what are we doing? We're creating kamma. We're creating, based on our intention, there's a kamma being made. Either a kamma that will lead us to a good place or a bad place. Or no matter what, there's an intention there. So all of these three things, this feeling, this perception, this intention, all of those occur due to contact. Now again, is eye contact permanent or impermanent? Well, is the eye permanent or impermanent? The eye is impermanent. One day your eye will cease to be. Are forms permanent or impermanent? We already discussed forms here. What are forms? Anything made up of the four elements or the four great elements themselves. And we already said that's impermanent. So then forms are also impermanent. And then is eye consciousness permanent or impermanent? Well, this eye consciousness doesn't stay in the eye only. It goes, it changes and arises in the ear. It changes and arises in the mind. It changes and arises in the tongue. It changes and arises in the nose. It changes and arises in the body. So at every moment, even at this moment right now, your consciousness is switching back and forth between the eye and the ear. That's why you can see me, and it feels like you can see and hear me. But right now, this consciousness is arising so quickly that we can't even say how quick it is. It's arising in the ear and the eye. It's switching back and forth. And then maybe if you smell something, it switches to the nose. Maybe it switches to maybe your legs hurt. Now it switches to the body. So it changes very, very quickly. So this eye consciousness is also impermanent. It changes. Then if the eye is impermanent, if forms are impermanent, and this consciousness is impermanent, then how can anything that arises from these three ever be permanent? Then eye contact is also impermanent. If eye contact is impermanent, then the feelings, the perceptions, and the intentions that arise through eye contact are all impermanent. Does that make sense? Then finally we come to, so we've covered 4 out of the 5 in that. And finally we come to consciousness. And the Buddha teaches, we learned this in dependent origination. We say consciousness, the reason consciousness exists is because of nama-rupa, because of name and form. Because of name and form, consciousness arises. So again, form is again the 4 great elements and anything made up of those 4. And we said name was 5 things: feeling, perception, intention, contact, and awareness. So remember we said here that sometimes we stare out the window, but we're thinking about something else and we don't notice that notice the things passing by. So we'll take another example. Imagine we're watching a TV show. Right now you guys are watching a TV show and someone comes into the room and says your name. They come and say Vishaka, or they come and say Mahindra, or they come and say Ruini. Whatever your name is, they come and say it. Now you're focused on watching this. Now, even though that person's saying your name, consciousness doesn't arise in the ear. Why is that? Consciousness is occupied right now. It's arisen in the eye, but we don't understand that consciousness doesn't arise in the ear. What's the reason? Maybe the voice wasn't loud enough. Maybe there was nothing to grab our attention, that our awareness didn't change. So even though that person is saying our name, we have no awareness of that at that moment. But as soon as that person comes and taps on our shoulder, or maybe that person yells our name, then what happens? Awareness changes. Our awareness changes to that sound. And then based on that awareness, contact occurs. Immediately, contact goes from the, immediately consciousness arises in the ear. Then based on the sound and the ear consciousness, then something happens, we get a feeling, a perception, and an intention. That happens instantly. So based on this, what we call name, and based on what we call form, that is how consciousness comes to be. Consciousness is something made up of name and form. Does that make sense? So all of these things, again, form, is it permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent. And then we already discussed contact. Contact is impermanent, so feeling, perception, intention is impermanent. And awareness also changes. Our awareness changes from one moment to the next. So all of these, none of these things are permanent. So then consciousness is also something impermanent because it is made up of things that are impermanent. So then we have an understanding that all 5 of these, whether it's form, feeling, perception, intention, or consciousness, all 5 of these are impermanent. So that's the first portion of Pañca Upādānakkhanda, which is this 5. Then we come to Upādāna, and we say, so based on these 5 things, we end up clinging to them in 4 separate ways. Now, how is it we start clinging to them? First is sensual pleasures. So based on a form, based on something we see, we cling to it. Based on a sound we hear, we cling. Based on a smell, based on a taste, and based on a tangible, we cling to those things. So that's what we say. We cling to sensual pleasures. So we see something, so we see let's say we see our child. What happens? We're seeing a form. What happens instantly? We cling to it. That's my child. His name is this. We see our house. That's my house. What do? We cling to a form. Even whatever it is, all these things we cling to. You say, that's my favorite song. Oh, that smells very, very good. That's my dessert. Whatever it is we're talking about, we cling to all these things in a very, very fine way. So we say we cling to sensual pleasures. And then we say, based on the formation of kamma, we also cling. So when we cling to these things, there's three ways that this bears fruit. It can either bear fruit in the sphere of sense desire, it can bear fruit in the form sphere, or it can bear fruit in the formless sphere. So these are the three bhavas. So Kama-bhava, Rupa-bhava, and Arupa-bhava. So based on something we see, we create a kamma, because remember here we said this intention, this is the kamma. So based on, as soon as we see something, as soon as a contact occurs, what happens? We're creating a kamma that will either bring us to hell, asura world, ghost world, animal world, human world, or the sixth deva world. If we're born in any of these worlds, we're born in the kama bhava. We're born in the sphere of sense desire. So all these worlds are included here. Then let's say we meditate. We're meditating and we obtain samadhi, concentration, a very, very high level of concentration, which we call dhyanas or jhanas in English. Let's say we cling to that. Wow, that feeling is far greater than anything we've experienced. If we cling to that, then what do? We create a kamma to be born in the Brahma worlds. If we're born in any of those Brahma worlds, then we're born in the form sphere. Then if sometimes we exceed the first four dhyanas, the first four dhyanas are called the form jhanas. And we go to the arupa jhanas, which is the formless jhanas. So if we cling to any of those, then we're born in the formless spheres. So I don't know if you guys remember when the Supreme Buddha was still a bodhisattva, he first goes to one teacher called 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏. And that teacher teaches the formless dhyanas. He teaches a high meditative state, which results in someone being born in one of these four worlds, in the formless sphere. So when the Buddha becomes enlightened and he looks to teach his teacher, he sees that he's born in this world, in one of these worlds. And he realizes there's no point, I can't teach in the Dhamma. So in this world, there's no way someone can realize the Dhamma. It's like that person's in a coma. He's in that meditative state, but he can't hear anything or he can't experience anything because he's developed and he's clung to this kind of feeling or this kind of dhyana. He's created a karma to be born here. So we cling in this kind of way, based on bhava. And then based on views. So the Buddha explains 20 types of views. So when we take form, someone says, form is equal to self. So he thinks form is self. Whatever we call form, that is what we call a self. Then someone says, another person comes to the view that inside form is what we call a self. So if there's something called a form, inside that form is the self, or what we call a soul here. So self here means, sometimes people use the word soul. So if we say someone says form is equal to a soul. Other people say inside form is the soul. Then other people say, no, inside the soul is form, or inside the self is form. Another person says, no, self, what we call a soul, is made up of form. So these are the four views he comes to based on form. Then in the same way, based on feeling, that person comes to a view, feeling is self, or feeling is the soul. Inside feeling is the soul. Inside the soul is feeling. Inside the soul is made up of feeling. And in this way, he thinks the same about perception. Perception is the self, in perception is self, in self is perception, and then self is made up of perception. Intention, same thing. Intention is self, in intention is self, in self is intention, self is made up of intention. Now I'm saying these and you guys are probably like, what does any of this mean? But just understand, all of these, or these views are what we have right now. Whenever we say, this is my child, this is my hair, these are my eyes, this is my body, we've fallen into one of these views. Whether you know it or not, we're in one of these, probably many. We take all of these as mine, as a self. So these are the views someone comes to. So look at this, what the Buddha realized. So based on these views, we also cling to these 5 things, which is the form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness. Based on a view, we cling to those things. And then finally, based on ignorance or avidya, we cling to those 5 things. So when we take form as me, we take form as mine, or we take form as being something as a self, saying this is mine, or there's a soul here, that's based on ignorance. So based on ignorance, we cling to those 5 things. We cling to these 5: the form, the feeling, the perception, the intention, and consciousness. So in any of these 4 ways, in really all 4 ways, we cling to the 5 things: form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness. Does that make sense? Is anyone confused on that? So there's something so I'm just giving a very brief outline here. Just understand. So for example, Diti, maybe you don't understand all of this. Just come to the understanding that in any of these ways, in many of these ways, people come to all kinds of wrong views. Some people come to the view that form is what we call a self. That's also wrong. Some people say, no, inside form is a self. That's also wrong. Some people say, no, the self, inside the self is form. That's also wrong. And some people say self, what we call a self or a soul, is made up of form. Those are all wrong views. But when we live our life, or whenever we live our life, we are always coming into these views. Whether we realize it or not, we always take something as mine. We say, this is mine, this is mine. That's not yours. We're grasping everything. Whether we understand it or not, that's what we come to. We come to these views. And why do we come to these views? Is because we take everything as me, mine, and as a self. So in all these ways, we cling to these things. And then what is it we're talking about when we say these 5 things? We're talking about something in time and space. So if we take the example of a form, we're talking about a form that maybe existed in the past. Maybe you're looking at a picture of yourself as a baby. So what is that? That's a form that existed in the past. Now that form, or whatever form it is, let's say we're talking about something in front of us right now, that form is something in the present. Or it could be a form that hasn't arisen yet. We're talking about something in the future that will arise. That form could be internal. That means something related to this body. Or it could be external. That means it could be outside. So anything, all these things that are around us are all external. Then it could be inferior. So there are some forms, for example, let's say someone's born as a deva. That's a superior form. Why? Because that form experiences much more pleasure than us. It's not as impure as this form. There's no impurities inside. There's no livers, there's no lungs, there's no nothing, there's no excrement inside those bodies. So that form is superior. So our form is currently inferior. Why? Because it's made up of all these nasty, impure things. Now it could be either gross, so here it means coarse, or it could be fine. So again, for example, when you say that a deva, the world we're in right now is very coarse. So if a deva comes to this world, he has to himself create a coarse body. Otherwise, he sinks inside this earth. So there's some instances when devas would come to visit the Supreme Buddha, and while they're standing in front of the Buddha, they start sinking into the ground. And then he rises again and he keeps sinking. Then the Buddha teaches there, the Buddha says, Deva, create a coarse body. Create a body that's coarse. That way you can stand on this earth. So then that Deva immediately creates a coarse body and he can stand in front of the Buddha. So there are some forms that are very coarse, and there are some forms that are very fine. And then there are forms that are either close by or they're far away. So in whatever way there exists a form, in whatever time there exists a form, we say that's all included in khanda. Whatever form it is we're thinking about, it's either in the past, present, or future, and that form will belong to one or many of these. So it might be internal or external, it might be inferior or superior, it might be gross or fine, it might be far or near. So there's not a single form that someone here can think about that doesn't belong or fit into one of these. They will all fit into one of these. In the same way, when we talk about a feeling, all those feelings we discuss, all those feelings we've experienced, all those feelings that we will experience exist in the past, present, or future, and they're all either internal or external. They're either inferior or superior. They're either gross or fine. They're either far or near. Same with perceptions. They're all either in the past, present, or future and belong to one of these 8. Same with intention. Same with consciousness. We're always talking about something in the past, present, or future, and we're talking about something that fits into these 8. Does that make sense? So then we can truly understand. So does anyone have any questions? At any moment, you can ask a question, okay, by typing in the chat or raising your hand. So now we can truly understand how deep of a trap we're inside. Because it's not that we choose to cling to these. None of us are thinking, okay, I'm going to cling to forms now. I'm going to cling, and I want to be born in the Asura world. I want to be born in the ghost world. Does anyone here want to do that? Does anyone here want to be born in hell? But without us knowing, without us realizing, based on these 5, we're creating karma, we're clinging to them, or it's more like we're falling into a trap here. We're falling into a trap, and we end up grasping these 4 things in these 4 ways. And what is it we grasp? Either a form that exists in time and space, a feeling that exists in time and space, a perception that exists in time and space. So think about all the ways that someone can grasp these things. So let's say someone's talking about a form. So with their body, with our bodies, we see a form. And then based on that form, let's say we see a mosquito, okay? So what is it we're seeing? We're seeing a mosquito. So we're seeing a form. So based on our body, we're seeing a form. Okay? And then based on that, we get a feeling. Based on that, we have a perception. Based on that, we have an intention. Based on that, there's a consciousness that arises. And then based on that form exists in the present, right? That form is external. That form is inferior. That form is coarse or gross. And that form is either far or near, whichever one it is. Maybe it's nearby. It lands on your hand. Based on that, we're creating karma to be born either in the hell world, asura world, ghost world, animal world, human world, or the deva worlds. So maybe we're spreading loving kindness to the mosquito, and we're entering into concentration. So now already we're creating karma to be born in a Brahma world. But maybe we have an intention, no, this mosquito is annoying, I'm going to kill it. So based on that, we're creating karma to be born in these worlds. What's the reason? We've fallen into one of these views. We've taken our form. Why is it we're killing the mosquito? We've fallen into one of these views. We view ourselves as one of these. We either say we're born, our form is self, or in one of these views we've fallen into. And what's the reason for that? It's because we take ourselves as me, mine, and a self. So what do? We end up killing the mosquito. That comes with intention. Based on that, what are we doing? Based on us killing the mosquito, based on that thought of killing, what are we doing? We're creating a future form. We're creating a future feeling. We're creating a future perception. We're creating a future intention. We're creating a future consciousness in the next life. That's being created for us. So based on just something we see, all of this is taking place. We're getting trapped into either getting another form, into getting another feeling, to getting another perception, to getting another intention, and to getting another consciousness. That's happening in this very moment. As you watch this video, what's happening? Based on your form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness, based on the form, sound, smells, tastes, and tangibles that we're experiencing, we're creating karma to be born in one of these worlds because we've fallen into one of these views, because we have ignorance. And all of those things exist in time and space. So this very moment, this is occurring right now. We're clinging to these Pañca skandha, based the Pañca Upādāna skandha is happening right now. We're clinging to those things. We're clinging to these five. So it's important to understand none of these can exist separately. So form can't exist without feeling, perception, intention, or consciousness. Consciousness can't exist without form, feeling, perception, or intention. All five go together. This consciousness can't just exist alone. There has to be a form there. There has to be a feeling there. There has to be a perception there, and there has to be an intention there. So then what we say, or what we put a name on, as either 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, as Vishaka, as Ruhani, as Mahinda, or whatever name you have, all we are is just a form, is just a feeling, is just a perception, is just an intention, and it's just a consciousness. And then based on these, and based on the external form, sound, smells, taste, and tangibles, what happens? We're creating new intent, we're creating new karma to again get another form, to get another feeling, to get another perception, to get another intention, to get another consciousness. So look how trapped we are. In whatever lives we've existed in the past, all we've had is just this five. All we had was a form, a feeling, a perception, intention, and consciousness. Everything that we're doing, all the jobs that we go to, the money that we earn, all those things we do is to just, again, to get these five. Whenever we have, anytime we interact in this world, every time we have an intention, we're creating karma. Based on that karma, what do we get again? Just these five. So look, based on just forms alone, we get trapped. Based on a sound, we get trapped. Based on a smell, we get trapped. Based on a taste, we get trapped. Based on a tangible, we get trapped. Just through form. And then what happens? Isn't there a feeling associated with this form? So let's say now we see our child, okay? Now what happens? Happiness arises. So based on a feeling that exists either in the past, present, or future, so we see that child, an internal feeling, whether it's a good, inferior, or superior feeling, let's say inferior, and whether it's fine or far or near, based on that feeling alone, what is it we're doing? We're creating, again, a form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness. Based on something, let's say we perceive a smell. Again, what happens? That based on something that exists in time and space, we're creating, again, these five. So look, a feeling can go into form, can go into sound, can go into smell, can go into taste, can go into tangibles, and then that feeling alone can exist in all of these. And then based on that, we can be born either in the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, based in the 𝗪𝗵𝗲, or in the 𝗪𝗵𝗲. And then what happens? We take that feeling as either that feeling is a self, in that feeling is self, in self is that feeling, or our self is made up of that feeling. So we fall into one of these views. And what's the reason for that? Because we take that feeling as me, mine, and myself. That's just through one. So based on a perception, again, something we perceive as a form, that exists in time and space, we fall into one of these worlds, we fall into one of these views, because we take that perception as me, mine, and myself. So let's say someone attains Sotapanna, he becomes the first stage of enlightenment. Then what happens? He is able to get rid of this. He gets rid of Ditthi. He get rid of Ditthi Upādāna. That means he no longer clings to any of these views. So he doesn't have any of these. Because he doesn't have any of these, he's entered the first stage of enlightenment. He can no longer be born in hell. He can no longer be born in the asura world. He can no longer be born in the ghost world. And he can no longer be born in the animal world. So now his clinging has reduced. Then when someone becomes the second stage, when he becomes Sakadagami or a once returner, then his desire for these decrease. Because they decrease, he only returns to these two worlds one time. Then someone becomes Anagami, and he completely abandons his desire for these. Then all of these worlds, then all of these get removed. And he can only be born in these two worlds, either in the formless world, in the form worlds, or in the formless worlds. But only when someone becomes an arahant, so he's still born because he still has ignorance. When someone becomes an arahant, he completely abandons ignorance, and there is no longer any future birth. So he doesn't have Upādāna anymore. He only has Pañca skandha. He only has a form that exists. When he, let's say, arahant is thinking about tomorrow, maybe he's thinking about, or tomorrow I've been invited to a dana, let's say. He's been invited to alms. So that thought, that idea exists in the future. Those feelings, those perceptions, those attentions, that consciousness exists in the future and exists inside space, whether it's internal, whether it's inferior or superior, is this gross or fine, is far or near, whatever it is, it exists in space. But there's no clinging to that thought. There's no desire there. Desire doesn't arise. Why? There's no Upādāna anymore. It's just a thought. That thought doesn't create karma. What happens to us? Okay, tomorrow for dinner, I'm going to have this. I'm going to have some, let's say, rice and curry. As soon as we think that, what happens? There's Upādāna there. We cling to it. We have desire. We're creating karma to be born again. It happens in an instant. Or maybe tomorrow, you guys, it's your birthday. You're going to go to a fancy restaurant and eat. What happens instantly? That thought, as we're thinking, tomorrow I'm going to go eat at this restaurant, that we've already clung to that. We've already fallen into the trap. We've already created a future form, a future feeling, a future perception, a future intention, and a future consciousness. That's all we did. Then we go ahead and eat at the restaurant. As soon as you see your dish come, as soon as you put that dish inside, that meal inside your mouth, as soon as you eat, as soon as you smell the food, every single moment, what are we doing? We're clinging to those 5 things, to a form, to a feeling, to a perception, to an intention, and to consciousness. That's all we've done. That's all we've done in the past. That's all we're doing in the present. And if someone doesn't realize the Dhamma or practice them, that's all he will do in the future. All we are just these 5 things, nothing more. So all those hopes and dreams we have, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, I'm going to become this, I'm going to be this wealthy, I'm going to have this kind of car, I'm going to have this kind of house. Every single thing we do is really just based on these 5. And all these 5 are completely impermanent. So all these attachments, all this suffering we go through is based on these 5. That's all it is. And these 5 are completely impermanent. So if someone one day realizes suffering, he ends up seeing what? He ends up seeing these 5. Because what is suffering? It's us creating these 5 again for ourselves. we create this same five again and again and again. We've had the same five again and again in the past. We have it currently, and in the future we'll have it. So look at the Supreme Buddha's knowledge here. Look what he realized here when he sat at the Bodhi tree. He saw, look, based on these five, someone comes to clinging based on a form, based on a sound, a smell, a taste, a tangible. And those exist in time and space. Based on that form, he's creating karma to be born in one of these worlds. Based on that form, he's coming to a certain kind of view. Based on a form, he's taking as me, mine, and a self. Just look at how much he realized. The way the Supreme Buddha splits these five, it's unimaginable. The Buddha gives a simile. Imagine there's a river, okay? Now, where do rivers end up going? All rivers end up going to the ocean. So imagine there's 5 rivers, and these 5 rivers flow into the ocean. Now, what do? We go by boat, and we stand, or we're on our boat at the place where all these 5 rivers are pouring into the ocean, okay? Now, as we're in our boat, can you guys take a cup of water and say, hey, this amount of water here is from river A. This water here is from river B. This water here is from river C. This water is from river D. This water is from river E. Can anyone do that? Can you split the water into those 5 rivers after they've all come into the ocean? The Supreme Buddha did something even more difficult than that when he split form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness in a way that we understand. That's the simile. So his realization, his knowledge is something far beyond anything we understand. The way he's able to split these into these ways is unimaginable to us. Like it's something so beyond our understanding that right now, even as we learn this, maybe there's still some confusion in our minds. How does this work? How does that work? Right? Because it's something that happens in an instant. In an instant, we cling to these things. In an instant, we're creating these same 5 for ourselves in the future. We're not able to see this is the feeling, this is the perception, this is the intention, this is the consciousness right here. But the Buddha can see that. At every moment, he sees this is the form, this is the feeling, this is the perception, this is the intention, this is the consciousness. In that thought, in what he's seeing, everything. So all these arahants, all the Supreme Buddha, he was the first to get rid of Upādāna. Then, based on the Supreme Buddha's teachings, all those arahants themselves were able to get rid of Upādāna. So it's important to understand when we do this meditation, what works or how it works is we're not aiming at understanding this. We're not aiming at understanding this, which is bhava, and we're not aiming at trying to say, okay, am I thinking is this form a self? Am I right now thinking is inside form self? None. We're not talking about any of these. What we're aiming at is getting rid of this. Why? Because all these 3 exist because of this. All the Upādāna exists because of this Upādāna, because of avidya. Because we have ignorance, because we take things as me, mine, and a self, then we cling to those. So when we do impermanent meditation based on the 5 aggregates of clinging, what are we aiming to get rid of? Ignorance. If we get rid of ignorance, it's like getting rid of the foundation of a building. The entire building collapses. So what are we targeting? We're targeting ignorance here as we practice the meditation. Does it make sense? So maybe we don't understand this. That's okay. Just have an understanding. By practicing impermanent meditation based on the 5 aggregates of clinging, we're working at getting rid of ignorance. We're getting rid of the idea that this form is me, this form is mine, this form is a self. We're getting rid of the idea that this feeling is me, this feeling is mine, this feeling is a self. This perception, intention, and consciousness is me. mine, and a self, we're getting rid of that idea. So it's important to understand when we do this meditation, this part, which is how these arise. How does form arise? How does contact arise? And how does consciousness arise? Because if we don't have an understanding of this, when we do the meditation, doubt or confusion will arise in your minds. You will think, why is form impermanent again? So you have to understand, form is made up of these four great elements. These four great elements themselves are impermanent, so form is impermanent. Why is feeling, perception, and intention impermanent? Why? Because these three things arise through contact. Contact arises through the combination of three things. Whether it's the ear, sound, and ear consciousness, whether it's the nose, smell, and nose consciousness, whatever those combinations are, all those things are impermanent. So that contact is impermanent. If contact is impermanent, then the feeling, the perception, the intention that arises through those contacts is also impermanent. And then consciousness is impermanent because it's made up of name and form. Again, form is impermanent, we discussed that, and name is these five, and these five are also impermanent. So consciousness itself is impermanent. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to ask, is there anyone who doesn't understand these five? Is there any part that's confused, or any part that someone's confused on? Mind that you understood everything? Ruining? Okay, so then we will practice the meditation. And so this meditation, first what we do is, we go through the five. We go through each of the five, so form, feeling, perception, intention, and consciousness, and we reflect on how those arise. So for example, this form made up of the four great elements is impermanent because this form arises due to a cause. All these forms arise due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that form ceases to be. Therefore, that form is not me, not mine, and not a self. Then we say if there is some feeling born of contact, all those feelings are impermanent. So if there is some feeling, that all those feelings were born due to a cause. When that cause ceased to be, that feeling ceased to be. So those feelings are not me, not mine, and not a self. And then we go through perception, intention, and consciousness. And then we talk about just form. So first we cover the five, and then we go to form. And then we say, whatever form, if there is some form from the past, whatever form there is in the past that has ceased to be, all those forms existed due to a cause. When that cause ceased to be, those forms cease to be. Therefore, those forms are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All forms from the past that have ceased to be are not me, not mine, and not a self. And then we say if there is some form that will arise in the future, all those forms will exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that form will cease to be. So all those forms are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All forms that will arise in the future are not me, not mine, and not a self. So we expand the space portion of that, so time and space, and we go through each one. So form in the past, present, future, forms that are internal or external, inferior, superior, gross or fine, far or near. So you go through each one. But since due to lack of time, we will cover all of those in one go, okay? So understand, when you do the meditation by yourself, you should expand and go through each one. Does that make sense? So whatever form in the present, then you do that entire one. Whatever form that is internal, you do the entire meditation. Whatever form that is external. Just for the sake of time, we will say whatever form in the past, in the future, in the present, internal, external, and we'll go through all of those and say they're all impermanent. Does that make sense? So you'll understand what I mean. So everyone close your eyes and sit in a comfortable position. Now first, calm your minds and bring mindfulness to how you're sitting. Be aware of your posture. Be aware of how your head is placed. Be aware of how your hands are placed. Make sure your hands are in a comfortable position. Be aware of how your feet are placed. Make sure they're in a comfortable position. Now with your eyes closed, think very, very mindfully. If there is some form that is made up of the four great elements, all those forms are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All those forms exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that form ceases to be. Therefore, that form is not me, not mine, not a self. If there is some feeling born of contact, all those feelings are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All those feelings exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that feeling ceases to be. Therefore, that feeling is not me, not mine, not a self. If there is some perception born of contact, all those perceptions are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All those perceptions exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that perception ceases to be. Therefore, that perception is not me, not mine, not a self. If there is some intention born of contact, all those intentions are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All those intentions exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that intention ceases to be. Therefore, that intention is not me, is not mine, is not a self. If there is some consciousness born of name and form, all those consciousnesses are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All those consciousnesses exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that consciousness ceases to be. Therefore, that consciousness is not me, is not mine, is not a self. If there is some form from the past, some form that will arise in the future, some form that has arisen in the present, there is some internal form, external form. if there is a coarse form, if there is a fine form, if there is an inferior form, if there is a superior form, if there is a distant form, if there is a nearby form, all those forms exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that form ceases to be. Therefore, all forms are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All forms are not me, not mine, not a self. If there is some feeling from the past, some feeling that will arise in the future, some feeling that has arisen in the present, whether it's an internal feeling, external feeling, whether it's a coarse feeling or a fine feeling, whether it's an inferior feeling or a superior feeling, whether it's a distant feeling or a nearby feeling, all those feelings exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, those feelings cease to be. Therefore, those feelings are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All feelings are not me, are not mine, are not a self. If there is some perception from the past, some perception that will arise in the future, some perception that has arisen in the present, whether it's an internal perception, external perception, whether it's a coarse perception or a fine perception, whether it's inferior or superior, whether it's distant or nearby, all those perceptions exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, those perceptions will cease to be. Therefore, those perceptions are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All perceptions are not me, are not mine, are not a self. If there is some intention from the past, some intention that will arise in the future, some intention that has arisen in the present, whether it's an internal intention or external intention, whether it's a coarse intention or a fine intention, whether it's inferior, whether it's an inferior intention or a superior intention, whether it's a distant intention or a nearby intention, all those intentions exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, those intentions will cease to be. Therefore, all those intentions are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All intentions are not me, are not mine, are not a self. If there is some consciousness from the past, some consciousness that will arise in the future, a consciousness that has arisen in the present, this internal consciousness or external consciousness, whether it's coarse consciousness or fine consciousness, whether it's inferior consciousness or superior consciousness, whether it's distant consciousness or nearby consciousness, all consciousnesses exist due to a cause. When that cause ceases to be, that consciousness will cease to be. Therefore, all those consciousnesses are impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. All consciousnesses are not me, are not mine, are not a self. Okay, you can open your eyes. So that is the very, very quick way of doing that meditation. But when you practice this, it's much easier to understand each concept when you take it individually. So when we say, whatever form that existed in the past, all those forms existed due to a cause. When that cause ceased to be, that form ceased to be. So all those forms are impermanent. All forms that existed in the past are not me, are not mine, are not a self. So think of yourself as a child. What happened to that form? That's a form that existed in the past. That form changed now. Now you look completely different. You're no longer a baby. So that form has changed. It's become impermanent. So that form only existed due to a cause. What's the cause of form? Those four great elements. But haven't those four great elements changed? They changed their nature. Because of that, that form now doesn't exist anymore. That form that existed in the past is no longer the same. So that form has become impermanent. So then can we say, when we look at a baby picture, can we say this is me? Can we say this is my picture? How can we say that? That form is something that's impermanent. That form is no longer there, it no longer exists. Does that make sense? So same with feeling. If we experienced a feeling in the past, so let's say we get a promotion at work. We got that 2 months ago. Now what happened as we got that promotion, as we heard those words, a feeling arose, a happy feeling. Now that feeling is something in the past. That feeling has changed. Why? Because our contact has changed. We no longer have that contact. The sound is no longer there. That ear consciousness is no longer there. Our ear has become impermanent as well. All those three things have become impermanent. They've changed. So that feeling that arose in the past is impermanent. It's no longer there. So then how can we say that feeling is me? How can we say that feeling is mine? How can we say that feeling is a self? Then you can work on present, anything in the present, in the future. So let's say there is whatever form that exists right now. Let's say we're talking about ourselves right now. All forms that exist in the present are impermanent. Why? Because they're going to change. They're made up of the four great elements. Those four great elements themselves will cease to be. Then this form is impermanent. And if this form is impermanent, then how can we take it as me, as mine, or a self? So as you do this, what happens? Your attachment to forms decreases. Your attachment to feelings decreases. Your attachment to perceptions, to intentions, to consciousness decreases. Why? Because you're seeing the true nature. You're seeing it as something impermanent. You're directly striking ignorance. You're trying to get rid of ignorance. So as you develop this meditation, your attachment to these 5 aggregates of clinging lessen. So that's the goal of this meditation. Then you come to the understanding that these same 5 aggregates of clinging are what exist everywhere. When you see an animal on the street, all there is just the 5 aggregates of clinging. That dog you see on the street is just a form, is just a feeling, is just a perception, is just an intention and a consciousness. When that animal dies and is born again, then all it gets again is just a form, just a feeling, just a perception, just an intention, just a consciousness. If there are beings in hell right now, all there is just a form, just a feeling, just a perception, just an intention, just a consciousness. And those five exist in time and space. And to those things, we cling. We cling based on those four ways, based on sensual pleasures, based on bhava, based on views, and based on ignorance. The Buddha teaches when hell beings are told that they're going to die and not exist in hell anymore, they scream, they cry, they get sad. These are beings born in the worst imaginable place. But even to that form, what happens? They cling. Even to that feeling, what happens? They cling. Even to that perception, that intention, that consciousness, what happens? Even beings in hell cling. It's not that they do it on purpose. It's that's by nature they cling. By nature they fall into that trap. So what happens? They create themselves a new form, a new feeling, a new perception, a new intention, a new consciousness in the future. That's all we've done in our journey in birth and death. And if someone continues on this journey in birth and death, that's all they will ever accomplish. There's nothing else that they will accomplish by existing. All they will do is have these five things. We'll create the five things in the future, and then they'll get those five in the future, and then create another five, and create another five, and create another five, and go through just these five. That's all you will ever have. If you're born, that's all you will get. You won't get anything more than this. Then you can understand why this is put inside suffering. Why? Because getting these five is suffering. Because you have these five, you have to go grocery shopping and stay at the market, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. You have to stand in line. You have to stand in line for gas. You have to go to work. You have to feed yourself. You have to feed your family. You have to wake up early in the morning, whether you're sleepy or not. Why? Because you have these five. Because you're going to have these five in the future. Does that make sense? So because we have an attachment to these five things is the reason we have to go through all these sufferings. So then these five is suffering. If someone has these five, they can't say this person has suffering. That's why arahants, they don't think, I'm going to commit suicide, but they see the coming of death as like a gift. Why? Because they can abandon these and they attain extinguishment, they attain nibbana. They no longer get these five. It's completely removed. There's no longer a future birth. Because they don't have any clingings, their thoughts are so pure, their actions are so pure. All of it, there's no clinging there. There's no wrong views there. So that's why we always say an arahant is someone who becomes enlightened, is someone who actually lives a happy life. Right? Because there's no more future births. They've eradicated suffering. There's no clinging there. They don't take themselves as a me. There's nothing that you can destroy, that you can remove, to get rid of, that you can cause suffering to arise or sadness to arise in an arahant. Someone asks, Bhante, hell beings cling because they fear death, that they will no longer exist at all. Is this why they cling to such horrible states of suffering? No, that being fears death. So when those beings understand that they're about to get removed from that world, a fear arises in them. They don't want to leave, even though they're consistently suffering. A fear of death arises in them. They've already clung to that state, whether they didn't choose to do that, but because they clung, because it occurred, they're clinging to that form, to that feet. Even in that's how just imagine that. If a being in hell is clinging to these five, then think about the clinging that we have to these five. So only by seeing these five as impermanent and as something that's not me, as not mine and a self, can we remove our attachment to these five. So it's a very, very important way of seeing the world, way of this meditation is very, very important, because if someone, the end goal here is to see this, to see these five aggregates of clinging, or then goes to see dependent origination, then goes to see the Four Noble Truths. So this is also included there. So it's a very, very important meditation. Maybe something that will take some time to understand and learn. And again, we didn't cover everything based on these five aggregates of clinging. That would take another 6 months. I only taught you very, very shortly based on the time we have. But there's an entire section in the discourse, in the Sutta Pitaka, just devoted to these five aggregates of clinging. You can read those suttas. They're mentioned in many, many discourses. This is found in the Khanda Vagga, in the Khanda Vagga in Samyutta Nikaya. So Khanda Samyutta is in like a bunch of suttas, bunch of discourses discussing just the five aggregates of clinging, what the five aggregates of clinging mean, what each word means. So read those discourses to increase your understanding of these things, and try to at least maybe once a day, or at least once a day, try to reflect on these five aggregates. Try to at least see everywhere you look, all you're seeing is just these five. As you see that, then your attachment will also decrease. Why? You're everywhere you look, your child is just the five aggregates of clinging. Yourself is the five aggregates of clinging. Your spouse is the five aggregates of clinging. That's all we're catering to. That's all we're doing. So at least try to see, at least try to have that kind of mindset where you try to see these five aggregates in real life. Does that make sense? So then, now if anyone has any questions, they can ask. If there's anything that they need clarifying on, I'll give you guys a few minutes. So then I'm going to assume that no one has any questions, and you guys have learned this very, very well. So today we learned the Supreme Buddha's. Someone asked, is it possible to share this file? So we'll share the meditation and the other parts as well in maybe a slide format on the WhatsApp group. Are you in the WhatsApp group? So we'll share it there within a few days, okay? So give us some time to, because we'll have to organize it and then add it. So, okay, glad Helga, you understood. And if there's anything else that someone needs help on, you can always ask. So today we learned the Supreme Buddha's teachings. We learned a very, very powerful meditation, and we practiced a meditation that even though we practiced it for a moment, it will 100% definitely help you in our journey of this birth and death. It will help you to escape from this journey. It's a very, very powerful meditation. We collected immeasurable merit. All the merit we collected, we share with all the devas. May all the devas rejoice in this merit. May all the devas provide righteous protection to all these lay devotees. May all the devas have the good fortune to escape from this long journey of samsara. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share all the merit we collected with our teacher who taught us this Dhamma, with Pañca Lokaswami, with Pañca Rohanikittiswami, with all the monks of Mahamevnawa, all the monks training in the Buddha's dispensation. May all the monks rejoice in this merit, and may they also be able to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share all this merit with all these lay devotees and their families. May all these lay devotees have the good fortune to one day realize these five aggregates of clinging, and may they also be able to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Everyone chant with me. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya kratang acchayam kama me bhante bhuri panya tathagata. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya kratang acchayam kama me dhamma sanditthika khalika. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayam kama me sangha punyakhetang anuttara. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I will chant a blessing for you all. Abhivadana silissa nichang vaddapachayino chattaro dhamma vaddanti ayuvanno sukham balang ayurarogya sampatti sagga sampatti mevacha ato nibbana sampatti minate samijjatu. May you all be happy, healthy, and well. 𝗪𝗺 Saranai Namo Buddhaya.
May we chant the forgiveness stanza, sons.
Okay.
Dear devotees, let's go to the flow and worshipping our Sainasana. 𝗏𝗏 vandami bante maya katam punyang samina anumoditabbang
Sadhu sadhu anumodami.
samina katam punyang mayhan databbang
Sadhu sadhu anumodite.
sadhu sadhu anumodami 𝗏𝗏 dwaratena katam sabbang achyang kamatame bante
Amami kamitabang.
𝗏𝗏 kamami bante tutiyampi 𝗏𝗏 kamami bante tatiyampi 𝗏𝗏 kamami
May
bante.
you all be happy and well. 𝗪𝗺 Saranai Namo Buddhaya.